My name is Joseph. I'm the organizer of Sino-American Talks. And one of the reasons I have organized this series of events is because I feel there are plenty of events around Beijing that are about China. There are plenty of resources and plenty of information, online and offline, about the United States. But there's relatively little happening in terms of discussion about the intersection between those two cultures, those two civilizations. I do think this is a problem which should be remedied because there are so many points for misunderstanding and confusion and false assumptions. And it can be kind of awkward or uncomfortable to talk about some of those points of misunderstanding or of assumptions. If I talk to a Chinese friend about Chinese territory in the South China Sea, I'm going to feel very uncomfortable and my friend is going to feel very uncomfortable. If a Chinese friend talks to me about racism and human rights issues in the United States, likewise, we're both going to feel very uncomfortable. But I honestly do think that first we have to start talking about these issues and addressing these issues, and only then can we come to rectify them and improve the situations and really understand the viewpoint that the other side is coming from. So this series of events is my little effort to move towards that. Today we're not going to be talking about territory, we're not going to be talking about racial issues. Today is going to be about education. Not only about the common viewpoints of what Chinese teachers and students act like and how American teachers and students act in an educational context, but also we're hoping to dig a little bit deeper and look at some of the stereotypes and the assumptions and see where the truth lies and where exaggeration lies and see where some commonality lies. That being said, I'm very happy to introduce Mike Levy. He is an international educator who's been working on educational issues between both China and the US for more than a decade. He has taught in a variety of contexts. He has worked in a very progressive school in Brooklyn. He has worked in one of the poorest provinces in China at a public university. He is also the author of a best-selling New York Times memoir about his experience teaching in Guizhou province. Currently, he is working to open the Beijing campus of Avenues, the World School. This is a cooperation between Tsinghua University, the Avenues headquarters in New York, and the Haidian district government. Mike lives here in Beijing with his wife, his 18-month-old daughter, and his chihuahua. He also does frequently travel back to the US to try and educate Americans who are curious about Chinese education. They often tend to be very skeptical or very enamored of it, and he does his best to try and give them a more realistic understanding of it. All right, I think I've spoken enough. I will turn the stage over to Mike. Mike, the stage is yours.
Okay. And thank all of you for bundling up and coming out on a chilly November afternoon. What I want to do today is speak a little and then hope that we can generate a lot of conversation. And I'll just start by deepening a little bit of my background, and then I'll get very teacherly and I'm going to give you guys a test. So be ready. So I've been in education for about 20 years, half that time in the US, half that time here in China. My first teaching experience in China was with the Peace Corps. I taught at Guizhou University. That was 3 years, and then immediately went and taught at a New England boarding school for 3 years. The New England boarding school had 500 total students. The school had $1 billion endowment. So 500 students in the entire school. That was the number of students I taught each semester at Guizhou University. It was quite literally going from teaching the poorest kids in the world to the richest kids in the world. And now I'm here in Beijing doing something, I guess, kind of right down the middle, which is to try to help open a school that swirls together the best of the East and the best of the West. We'll talk more about that later. But suffice it to say, I've spent a long time thinking about these two school systems, the stereotypes, and how to, as Joseph said, dig a little bit deeper and get beyond the stereotypes. So that's some of what we're going to be talking about today. Okay, so I think, before we get to your test, I'll give you two quick anecdotes that won't surprise those of you who are in education, and I've talked to people about the differences between East and West, but when I was at Guizhou University, there was one day when I was walking with the dean of the English department. This lovely man, he was built like a linebacker. He was very stocky. He was born in Shanghai but was moved to Guizhou during the Cultural Revolution and never left. We were walking to a department meeting. There were about 30 members of the English department. I was the only foreigner. And he said, "Mike, today I've set aside 15 minutes for you to speak to the department so you can tell them how to make the students creative." And that was quite a challenge. I failed to tell them how to make the students creative. But that's what I was meant to bring to Guizhou University, was the pixie dust of American creativity. Similar, somewhat silly thing, when I was in New Hampshire, one of my colleagues, he was a math teacher. He had taught at this school for something like 1,000 years. A charming, lovely man. The students all loved him. And he, in all earnestness, once asked me, "Mike, is it the Chinese, the Koreans, or the Jews who are best at math?" And so I was taken aback. So I was like, "The Jews." Anyway, so these are the stereotypes we're all familiar with. Today, we'll maybe discuss them, maybe avoid them. But let's do a quiz. So it's a 10-question quiz, and you can work alone. You can work with a partner, and then we'll go over the answers. And anyone who gets 10 correct answers, Joseph will buy them a beer.
I mean,
okay. So I don't know how to distribute these efficiently. What percentage of total book sales in China are test prep or self-improvement? Guesses?
53%.
All right, let's hear somebody defend their answer. Who would like to? No defense. It's just.
No logical reason.
It's a pretty broad category.
It is a very broad category. Well, the interesting thing is, of course, the comparison of the two. So in China, it's 34%, and in the U.S., it's 2.4%. Right, we look over here and see things like this, and I feel like whenever I'm on the subway, inevitably there's somebody reading a book like this, SAT, GRE, GMAT. I don't know what this indicates, but I'm interested. It's interesting to me that there's such a huge difference. Number 3. We'll move on to number 3. There are more than 350,000 Chinese studying full-time in U.S. schools. How many Americans are studying full-time in Chinese schools? Anyone have the numbers there? Can we guess? Yeah.
1,000.
10,000. 1,000. What I've seen are two numbers. One is about 30,000, and the other is about 10,000. And the difference that I've seen in them is 30,000 are the number of Americans studying in China, and then about a third of that are full-time students. But then we could probably cut that down even more. How many Americans are studying full-time in Chinese schools? So not at like Hopkins Nanjing Center or like some sort of bilateral thing. It's probably a pretty small number. All 350,000 Chinese are studying in American institutions. I think that's a very, very big difference, besides just the numbers, the raw number. Okay, let's quickly go through the true and false. Chinese students applying to schools in Australia need only submit their Gaokao score. False. I think it's false because it's only a province in Australia, but there are schools in Australia that's it. If you get Gaokao score X in your province, you're in.
Yeah.
Fascinating, right?
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, it's true. And why not why we might predict that could spread to other parts of the world. Why does an American university? Well, they might need a lot of data points, but why not include Gaokao as a data point? Yes?
Is that just to cater to the Chinese market that they do that?
I'm not an expert on Australian education. Yes?
I used to work with Brazilian students, and the Brazilian admission system is also like the Gaokao kind of thing, like you take a test, and some universities in the US are accepting those scores as part.
Okay. The why is a good question. I don't know. Okay, number 5. More than half of Silicon Valley workers are Chinese. That means like tech workers, not just this is a poorly phrased question. The word tech workers in Silicon Valley are more than half Chinese.
Chinese, like,
You mean eight?
or like Chinese, like
American-born Chinese?
Yeah, right.
Okay, good. Well, so this is a trick question. It's false. More than half of the workers are of Asian ancestry, not just Chinese. But then we get to the next one, which is tied to this. Less than 1% of Silicon Valley tech workers at or above managerial level are Chinese. And this, let's replace Asian. So more than half of Silicon Valley tech workers are Asian. Less than 1% of Silicon Valley managers or above are Asian. In other words, huge part of the industry, and there's a bamboo ceiling. That's a phrase that I've heard. I don't know if it's just a friend who invented it or if it's like a real thing. But there's definitely a bamboo ceiling, and 2 guesses why. On the one hand, we could say, there's some racism there. Or on the other hand, we could say, are Asians coming out of a general educational milieu that does not breed the spirit of management? That's something for us to talk about today. 7! More than 8,000 Chinese students were expelled from American schools last year and therefore forced to return to China. True. It is true. A huge, I mean, if you start looking at some of the both anecdotal and now, the studies that are being done of Chinese in American schools, it can be pretty heartbreaking. It's not an easy transition. And we, in the educational space, haven't figured out how to do this very well yet. Obviously, lots of Chinese going abroad, but what's happening to them once they get abroad? Number 8. 90% of high net worth families in China intend to send their children abroad for high school and or college. True, yes. And I don't know what the word intend means. This comes from...
Intend or would want to.
Would want to. I think that it's, what's the name of that report? The rich people report? Yeah, what is it? Yes. And I think if I remember correct, by the way, all of these, I Googled them. This is not... But I think in that are strongly considering. So... take that how you want to take it. 9! Chinese students are the best performing students in the world according to PISA.
True.
false. Shanghai.
Well done. Yes, see, very careful reading. This is not about Chinese. The Chinese do not take the PISA. Certain schools in Shanghai sit for the PISA. And those students indeed score very highly. Finally, Tsinghua University has the largest yearly budget of any public university in the world. That is true. I think it's like $4 billion. So that's not as high as some private universities, Harvard, Stanford, but it's a lot higher than Penn State or Texas A&M, both of whom have huge yearly budgets. So Tsinghua University, this is like the heaviest hitting public education institution on earth.
But when you take out corruption, how much is that?
Yeah. The end of my brief remarks, I want you to have a firm answer to the tongue-in-cheek question that Joseph and I came up with for our talk today, which is, I don't know if you remember it, but it's who will steal your job in 10 years? A Beida grad or an Oberlin grad? So which, that kid who's a senior right now in college is going to be best prepared for taking our jobs, right? Best prepared for the 21st century. And of course, that question is a stand-in for the bigger question, which is which general system makes more sense? The liberal arts education, where you ask a lot of questions, you're very flexible, but you can actually do nothing, or that was supposed to get a laugh, but apparently you agree with that. Or the Chinese system where it's, rote knowledge and you have a very firm foundation, but perhaps have rarely been asked to innovate or, walk into a mist and come out on the other side. The other way to think about this, and I'm going to have you guys do a vote for me. Another way to think about this is, my wife is here in the front. We have an 18-month-old daughter. We've started looking at preschools. So I'm going to have you vote for me. Should we send my daughter to Fangcaodi, which is right down the street from us, Chinese education, and keep her in that system all the way through till she's 22? Or should we send her to ISB and put her on the path of international education and college abroad? So you're going to vote for me. And be bold. Don't think of nuances. I can see in your eyes all the intellectual nuances. Okay, who votes Fangcaodi?
But with nuance.
And who votes ISB? Slaughter. Okay. Tell me why.
My nuance is up until a certain grade, and then put her in ISP.
When should we transfer her?
I think junior high.
Why?
Because by then she'll be bicultural. Her Chinese and English will both be great. The math skills will be off the scale. The few developmental problems she has in teacher will be, she's going from the fire into the frying pan.
Right.
Rather than the reverse. So I
Okay.
think she can solve those problems.
Then why not just let her ride?
Because then, well, we can talk about that. Because you don't want her to go to college here, that's for sure. And at high school, 90% of the purpose of high school is to prepare for college in whatever system, but especially in China. And you don't want her wasting time preparing for Chinese colleges in a Chinese high school.
So with certainty, Chinese colleges are not preparing students for the 21st century.
No. Except 21st century in China, maybe.
I find the kindergarten years or the preschool years are so formative to the way in which somebody approaches learning that it depends on your values and how you want your child to look at learning. I think you should use that to make a decision. I think those early years are very important.
Why did, so other than David, right?
Yeah.
Other than David, everyone was like, do the international thing. Why? Why are we indicting the Chinese system so we're so weighted? Why? What are you afraid of? Huh?
Well, first of all, I didn't vote for any. Because I have this one, so I've done some research and I believe that there should be at least I hope there should be a middle way, and I lay hope on your school, on Avenue, the world school type of school coming up. But what was your question? Why we didn't? Well, I was, he actually has a Beijing hukou, and we were gonna send him to the Beijing kindergarten because my hukou is just in the East District and near the best kindergartens. But then after a while, you start, you talk to moms and
that'll drive you crazy talking to moms.
One big reason is just that the student body is too big, and this area there are a few really very good, so-called good, we say, Chinese kindergartens, but the student body is 35, 40 kids per class. That's just
So where is this little guy? Where is he in school?
He's not 3 yet.
Oh, he's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, you still have some time. Like us, you still have some time. Life is good. Don't have to worry. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that you can't overemphasize that statistic of just the ratio of students to teachers. I don't think it's a coincidence that you tour a college like Oberlin, and they throw out that nine students to one teacher, ratio again and again and again because it's so crucial. Yeah.
Good. But I'm worried now. I feel like we might just be a room full of hippies. Surely one of us can make a case for, I don't know, I never know what word to use now. Confucian, Chinese, Eastern. education? I don't know. Ah, good.
I don't know if I can necessarily make a case for Confucian or Eastern education or whatever label we want to put on it. But I certainly have a case to make against the American style as I experienced it. I went to a small liberal arts schools. I went to a small liberal arts college. My teachers were great. Class size was never more than 15. And I graduated. I was not able to code. I was not able to do accounting. I was not able to do engineering. I had no skills. I was great at reading literature. I knew a lot of history. I had a smattering of a few different languages, and none of those are something that an employer wanted to see on my resume.
And yet here you are. Well, that's a great point. Thank you for taking on that voice.
I'll let the cat out of the bag a little bit. I actually agree with David, and Anissa and I haven't fought this out yet, but I would love to see Asher in the beginning going through the Chinese system, and then maybe when life becomes too miserable and stressful, put her in a hippie school. Okay. A few remarks from me, and then we'll come back to some conversation. What I think is most interesting about this question of which system is best preparing kids for the 21st century is how it seems to me that educators on both sides are having existential crises and looking across the ocean and saying, oh, they're crushing us. So American educators are the Chinese education system, they're so bright, the PISA scores, and then Chinese educators are saying, oh, we're stuck in this economic rut and we need the education system to blast us out of it, but we don't have it. And I'll read two quotes that you may have heard before that I think are typical of this. The first from the American side. This is from a 1980 study, A Nation at Risk. It's like a seminal educational document, and educational documents rarely leave, the teachers' colleges that they're in, but this one actually was like big news, and it still is. Okay, so here it is. The educational foundations of our society are presently being eroded by a rising tide of mediocrity that threatens our very future as a nation and a people. If an unfriendly foreign power had attempted to impose on America the mediocre educational performance that exists today, we might well have viewed it as an act of war. Okay, that's how crappy American schools are, right? Okay, so now I'll flip it, and this is from Beida professor. This is a fairly famous quote. No one, after 12 years of Chinese education, has any chance to receive a Nobel Prize. Even if he or she went to Harvard, Yale, Oxford, or Cambridge for college, out of the 1 billion people to have been educated throughout their childhood in mainland China since 1949, there has been no Nobel Prize winner. This forcefully testifies to the power of education in destroying creativity on behalf of the Chinese society. Any reactions to those two quotes?
Well, now there is no.
That second quote is a little bit dated. Well, both sides seem to be having this existential crisis.
Is the dichotomy, one is talking mostly about innovation, and the other's talking about basic skills?
I agree.
They're coming from two sides of the divide.
Yes,
they're looking at the other, and the grass is greener, right? So the innovation of the U.S. educational system versus the teaching of basic skills of the Chinese educational system. What this masks is how profoundly innovative these two school systems are at this moment. This is a moment of incredible innovation. On the U.S. side, the charter school movement is alive and well. Whatever you think of the charter school movement, there are public schools, regular public schools, doing incredible things. High Tech High in San Diego. The local public school closest to our place in Brooklyn has completely thrown out the state curriculum, and it's a primary school and middle school, and they only use primary sources. There's no textbooks. This is just a local public school, like right down the street in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. And I don't think that's all that out of the ordinary. There's a lot going on. And on the China side, despite what you may have heard, there is so much going on. At the university level, to talk about Tsinghua again, they're opening the campus in Seattle, and they've got Schwartzman Scholars opening. So they're doing an innovative thing in the US, they're doing an innovative thing on their own campus. What's the Shenzhen school that's in its college, that's in its 4th year? They didn't look at Gaokao scores.
They went out of the university system, didn't look at Gaokao.
Right, and I think they've been pulled back in a little bit, but what, Nanfang Kuji Dashi.
Yeah,
Okay,
technically.
yeah. A colleague of mine told me that their first, so that they've been around for 4 years, so their first graduates are now going off to grad school. She said the results of where they're going are stunning. So those kids have went off to US, European schools and are in the top schools. So that's a brand new, totally innovative part of Chinese higher education that's killing it. And then if we go down to young kids, primary school, middle school, just one innovation here in Beijing. This fall, all Beijing middle schools are required to spend 10% of their teaching time outside of the classroom, outside of the school even. And Chaoyang is 20%. So Chaoyang district is like, oh yeah? We're going to do 20%. So what this means, the coolest one is, now I forget which one it is. One of the middle schools built a greenhouse, and they're having the kids grow traditional medicines. And so that's 10% of their time. They're in the greenhouse, they're growing medicines. And even cooler than that, this is a city-wide thing. So these classes are capped at 30 kids. But if your school doesn't fill one of its classes, other kids, you're supposed to register these online, and anyone in the city can sign up for any of the classes. So it's like if that middle school is doing something where they, go and dig for dinosaur bones, right? And this middle school is doing something where, whatever it is, you can sign up for any of them. That's incredibly innovative. And for me, I cannot imagine New York City saying 1 day out of 5, the kids are off running around New York. Hell no. Right? So that's a extraordinary innovation. At the high school level in Beijing, there's nothing. There's no innovation, unless it's in a guojibu. Why? What is constraining innovation in Chinese public high school? Yeah. Every second you spend on something interesting, you might be harming your student's life because they're not competing. So that is definitely, but despite that, I would say that China, I actually really only know Beijing, but Beijing as a representation of China, super, super innovative. And also another thing is that the same way that back in Deng Xiaoping's heyday, we had SEZs, right, strategic economic zones, to transform the economy. We have SEZs today, special economic zones. North Haidian is one of them, where basically the rules don't apply. So the central government has said, here are a couple of places where, we will, what is the thing? We'll feel through the pond by walking on the stones. And educationally, we're going to see that as well. Okay, so now I will get to my conclusion, and then we can talk a little bit more. So who's going to steal your job? Is it going to be the Beida grad, or is it going to be the Oberlin grad? And my tongue-in-cheek answer to a tongue-in-cheek question is, it doesn't really matter because all of Oberlin's grads will be Chinese in 10 years. But my more serious answer, who is better preparing kids for the 21st century, Oberlin or Beida? No question, 100% Oberlin. I really believe that. I think that, and I'll now slip into a bunch of stereotypes, but in a world where we don't know what jobs will look like in 20 years, a student who is self-motivated to navigate through situations where no one can tell them where it's going or what the answer is, that is a fundamentally necessary skill for a student graduating today. And liberal arts colleges, that's basically all they do, right? You sit around and you find yourself. You find little you. And you need little you to guide you through that future. So if nothing else for the sake of argument, will put the flag in Oberlin, Ohio. Okay, so now I will close with something that I've only been thinking about it recently, and since some of you know lots about Chinese history, you can critique this, we can talk about it maybe a little bit. I feel like educationally, right now, China's in a moment that isn't all that different from late Qing dynasty. So what should China do with its education system? Seems like there could be three paths. One is double down on the current system. So in the late Qing dynasty, recommit to the Confucian texts, like forcibly get rid of everything Western. And maybe Xi Jinping is in that camp. He's not maybe super thrilled with Western textbooks or whatever. Okay, the other extreme is burn down the traditions. Get rid of the stuff that's holding us back. Innovate. And, you know, Mao came a lot later, but that's, you know, the four olds. Get rid of the four olds. And then there's people who are trying to go down the middle. So in late Qing, it'd be like the self-strengtheners who wanted a Chinese core, but Western education at the periphery. So like, you know the scientific method, but it doesn't influence whatever is Chinese. Like even if, I don't know how that works. And in fact, I'll say that doesn't work. So my concluding statement, which might be completely wrong, is I don't think there is a middle way. I think that if you let in questions in the way that liberal arts education lets questions in, you can't square off a little part of your politics and say, but nope, not that. So just like self-strengthening didn't work then, I don't think a middle way will work now. I think it's well, there we go. So that's the end of my formal remarks. And what I'm hoping we can do now is generate some conversation. So take 30 seconds. I'll sip my water. You can ponder. We can see if anybody wants to offer some thoughts, ask a question.
Okay, so my name is Alex. I graduated from Carleton College, my liberal arts.
See? Room for the hippies.
And then I went on to the Hopkins Nanjing Center after that. So the not 100% Chinese university or whatever. But at the same time, it did feel like an experience at Nanda, at least for the 2-year program there. So.
Yeah.
I'm inclined to kind of disagree with the point you made about, you know, the middle way being kind of, you know, not the best way or not achievable, totally impossible. So I wrote my master's basically on this little college in Guangzhou, or this institution within Sun Yat-sen University, and it's called the Boya School. And it was founded by this guy named Ganyang. He's a very influential kind of philosopher of education. I think he got his PhD at U Chicago, and basically wanted to take kind of a Leo Straussian sort of great books philosophy, and he applied it to this school. I think it has, you know, it's very, very small. It has a graduation rate of around like 1,000, 2,000 kids, and most of them go on to do kind of like, yeah, PhDs, postdocs, things like that. They firmly enter academia. And the idea is essentially it's within Sun Yat-sen, they don't require Gaokao. And so basically high-performing high school students around, like they get approached their sophomore year of college, and they said, well, you don't have to potentially take the Gaokao, you could, you know, go into this interview process. All students graduate with a degree in philosophy. And a lot of classes are basically almost 50-50. You know, you'll be learning kind of the you know, Sanguo Yanyi in one class, and then you'll be, you know, reading Shakespeare or discussing, you know, the Peloponnese War in another class. Very discussion-based, very, you know, like your own personal direction. And last I heard they opened up a new location in Chengdu or Chongqing, somewhere in Sichuan. And, you know, of course, it's up for argument whether or not this is like an expanding trend, whether or not it can be sort of representative of the norm. But I do think it's kind of interesting that it's a permissible form of education that's arguably very, you know, domestically Chinese. But at the same time, it's trying to find that middle path. And when I was there for about 10 days, kind of doing research and sitting on classes, talking to students, And basically the big kind of common denominator is this sort of the passion that these students had for this form of education. You know, I don't know if that's a remarkable or quantifiable form of success, but the fact that, you know, this was, you know, a veritable kind of dead poet society within this, you know, Sun University. And, you know, again, it's very, very small, and who knows if it's just kind of an experiment that'll go on for about 10 years and then kind of peter out. I mean, there was one question that a student brought up. It was like, if, you know, because Ganyang, I think, is in his 70s at this point, or his 60s. He's still teaching, he's still incredibly busy. But, you know, one student posed the question, once Ganyang passes on, what are we going to do? You know, because this is very much built around the philosophy of one person. But at the same time, I guess, sorry, this is kind of like long-winded, but I do think this is one potentially acceptable version of a middle path.
That's an awesome example, and I want to learn more, so we'll have to swap info. Let's hope that one of those graduates finds a .com business that makes him $50 billion, and then everyone in China will want to go to schools like that. That's all it'll take. Great point.
This is actually kind of common in Beijing with high school students that I actually work with. Beida Fuzhong, it's like, that's like their thing. Like, they're like super experimental. Their principal is like, yes, liberal arts, but I think there's actually been somewhat of a backlash this year, according to one of my students, where the English teacher who like was very instrumental and very much like working with the principal to have pretty much this type of education was fired and had to like write this very weird like self-criticism post on his Weibo of like, I'm sorry I failed, this experiment failed, and they've taken it back a step. I think it was just kind of, they tried to apply this to the whole entire Beida Fuzhong, you know, several thousand students, and they weren't really ready for it, I suppose. So you have just like regular like undergraduate Beida students going into class, teaching classes. You have nobody really knowing, you know, it's just promising students coming out of middle school, right? And nobody really knowing what this environment is supposed to be. So it's kind of like the situation that you had in Guizhou, where like someone walks in, it's like, okay, I'm the principal, we're gonna reform, we're gonna have this international education, teach these kids critical thinking. And the kids, and no one really knows what that means. So this is the same kind of direct admission to college program that a lot of, I think Arjun has that, Sejong has that, BNDS, which is
the word that, at least in translation, was all over the newest draft for the new 5-year plan is entrepreneurship, right? So like central government is like entrepreneurship, that's our future, and that's a very, at least in English, that word is distinct in a way from innovative, because entrepreneurship is like you figure out ways to make money, and innovative is like you figure out ways to disrupt. So I don't think you can pull those apart, right? Like I don't, but maybe someone smarter than me can design a curriculum where it's just people coding new ways to buy things online, and that's the only Alibaba has to worry, not the Communist Party. Yeah.
Aren't we mixing up two discussions in the argument over whether you can have a middle way? The argument you were making that there is no real room for a middle way. You are arguing about there not being a middle way in terms of educational style. But the gentleman in the front, I forgot your name.
Alex.
Alex. You were arguing about the content of the curriculum, and there being a substantial part of the curriculum being China-related subjects, Chinese thinkers, right? But that you discuss, that half of the classes discuss Chinese thinkers, doesn't mean the whole school, as you presented it, seemed to be on the liberal, democratic, creativity-inducing side, right? So I feel that these are two different issues, and I feel that the argument that the middle way doesn't really exist still stands. This is a very old discussion, of course, in China. Can you have a Chinese tea? Can you have a Chinese core and Western knowledge on the top? And I agree with Mike that you cannot that you cannot box off different. Let's say you have to be you're conformist when it comes to politics, but you're creative when it comes to the topics that are discussed in your liberal arts college. So I feel that this argument still stands.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an excellent point and a very important distinction. It's not like, you know, you're going to introduce Homer and Shakespeare into the curriculum, all of a sudden you have, you know, these ambitious entrepreneurs who, you know, want to go straight to Silicon Valley. I mean, I think that's, you know, it's too theoretical, and this is also very, you know, these kinds of things when you measure success, it's on such a case-by-case basis. But I agree, I mean, curriculum is only one very small part of the equation, but at the same point, you know, at the same time, it's like, to me, especially the two quotes you brought up earlier, you know, it almost seems like you're kind of establishing a yin-yang kind of dynamic between the two, that both have something to learn from each other, and, you know, a middle path, I'm not necessarily advocating for Existential or self-strengthening, but it's, you know, it takes many different potential forms. But I think also, you know, marking the distinction between entrepreneurship and innovation is also very important to this discussion, because, you know, I asked a lot of these kids, you know, what's your ambition? You know, what do you want to take what you've learned and how do you want to apply it to your livelihood? And most of them are like, well, I just kind of want to come back to this school and teach, you know, Herodotus for 30, 40 years, something like that, and that's perfectly fine. But there's not too much of an ambition to go beyond this bubble. They don't seem to be like, oh, I think I've come up with this really great algorithm that Alibaba would really benefit from, or something like that. I didn't really see any of that, and, you know, whether, to what extent that's kind of connected to the curriculum or anything like that, I mean, it's up for discussion, but, yeah.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead. I was going to move us slightly in a different direction, so please.
As was I, so.
I'd like your direction.
I think one thing that Eric is bringing into this discussion that obviously you may be responding to or maybe not, I'm not sure, is the question of content and approach. So I think just saying, oh, this is a middle path because we're also reading Chinese text, but the overall milieu is still this westernized approach, means that potentially that's not as middle as it might seem. And that's really a question that I have when considering the existence of a middle path, because like even in the question of where you should send your kid to preschool, just to give some background, I think one thing I've learned since coming to China in a deeper way is that part of the reason there are these stereotypes about rote memorization is because the fundamental process of learning the Chinese language requires you to drill down on characters in such a fundamental way. And I think that colors the educational experience in a certain manner that's hard to divorce an approach from that content because of the sheer volume of content that you need to learn there. So I wonder when it comes to thinking about whether there's a middle path or not, whether certain aspects of what we think of as Chinese are irreversibly wedded to that approach, or if there are ways to somehow get at them from a different angle, like a Western angle.
My feeling is there's reason for optimism, but there's also a lot of reason for pessimism because it seems like everyone realizes the problem, and the people with the wherewithal to solve the problem are the ones who are most likely just to get out. Because it seems like China is threatening to develop a system that's very class-based, just like it is in the West somewhat, where only the people that are in the top 5% can even get a good education. And a lot of them get that way by just avoiding the Gaokao and just leaving the country. Or their parents have already done that and come back. And so it's two different worlds of the traditional educational system and then this one that's alternative. So I think you're so right. This is a great message you're giving, because most people don't really realize that the Chinese system is right now so experimental and so innovative. Because I do a lot of state media, and they talk about this all the time. There's constant shuffling of the boundaries and loosening up, providing more opportunities, providing different tiers or tracks for students to get into, revising the Gaokao. There's a new university every week practically, so there's. But I think two things. One is this class thing, that you're getting more and more of this polar economic inequality problem. And then the other thing is that the schools themselves, even though there's more resources, it's still competitive at a rate that's unimaginable in the West. Like 8-9 million people taking the college entrance exam is a fact that's not going to go away soon. So there's this competitive aspect that keeps it conservative because of the reasons that you said. And then the other thing you said, which is the government aspect. Everyone realizes an innovation problem. They can say 创业 all they want, 创业 a million times. But if they don't do what's like the Beida students, for example, have trouble even getting an internet account, and the internet account they get is blocked. There's a woman named Helen Gao who used to write the New York Times, the Haigui, and she tells about the horrors of Beida students just trying to get internet. And they usually do it off campus in an internet cafe because the one on campus doesn't work. And Xi Jinping, coming out, cutting down foreign influences, foreign textbooks. So on the one hand, you have lots of people understanding the problem, working to resolve it, all kinds of innovation in education. At the same time, you have the government who, with one mouth or one hand, says 创业, and then the other hand are doing everything they can to restrict people, so that the brightest people have no choice but just to get out. So I don't know what's going to happen. I see it's moving in so many different directions. It's very hard to predict what's going to happen. But I will predict that the people with the money are just going to get the hell out, which is what they're doing now. They're voting with their feet.
Yeah, it's kind of depressing. But actually, in the spirit of these talks, the 中美说, one of the things that we all have to do when we're talking with folks who aren't in China is explain that it isn't monolithic here. I mean, that's the first thing we always say, right? That actually, within the government, outside of the government, there's huge debate. Within the Ministry of Education, there's people who want to punch each other in the face. I mean, there's not agreement. Some want it to be one way, some want it to be another. And that's part of why it's so hard to predict. I have a lot of empathy and sympathy for educational planners, because on the one, yes, let's open things up a little. Maybe let's let more private schools open or this or that. But that screams of inequality. I mean, we know in the U.S. system that people, white flight, people opted out of the public system and eviscerated it when they all went off to New England boarding schools or whatever people did. I mean, I went to a private school that was down the street from the public school. My parents, $10,000 that they paid for my tuition. That, you dry up the public. So what should China do? They've got all these people who really want something new. But I don't know, it's super complicated. Yes?
I work at ISP, and I think what people don't touch on, there's the role of the parents as well. It's like, an ISP, hippie school, great school, we're all about project-based learning. I still have kids who are more from a Chinese background who tell me, no, Mr. T, I didn't do my homework last night because I had my own homework. Whoa. They still go home, and their Chinese parents, they can do math for several hours. And a big thing that we're looking at now is how can we educate the parents? Because the parents, if they come to ISP for the brand, the parents who get what we're trying to do, their kids are thriving. Parents who perhaps want to say, my kid goes to ISB, but when I meet with them, you can still see philosophically, there's definitely, they say, we want you to do this, this, this. I'm like, well, have you talked to our issues? We don't do this, this, this. We don't do tests the way that you test your kids. So yeah, I think it's interesting when you hear all this data, absent of that's the role parents play. So, and this goes back to the question you asked about your child. I think you put your child wherever you want to put your child. The role of the parents, at least in the formative years, go where you can save most money. Just make sure your kid, you have conversations with your kid over the dining table. What are you reading? You read a lot. And that's what I tell a lot of my more Eastern parents as well.
Yeah. I remember having a conversation with a parent back in New York, and this was when I was teaching middle school, and she said, my son isn't reading enough. You need to do something about it. And I said, how often do you read at home? And she said, I'm too busy. I said, well, I can't help you. Like, if you're not reading at home, if you're not modeling that for your kid, of course they're not going to pick up a book and read. So that's a really good point. Joseph sent out the information for an event that was at the Yale Center where they were discussing a similar topic, and the best question from the audience, so it was like 4 heads of high school from Beijing, and a Chinese mother asked these 4 principals, what do your kids, your biological children, do after school? Like, what, because you guys are like super duper amazing educators at these sort of progressive-y places. What do your kids do? And no. They were like, they like play video games or whatever. I mean, one of the British guy was like, my son rides a horse. That was a terrible accent, but whatever, British people do. So, and I think that's probably what this mother. I don't know what she anticipated the answer would be, but I don't think it's what she's doing with her kid, or the question wouldn't have been asked.
I was born and raised in Beijing, and I moved to Canada when I was 13, so I had the Chinese education until I was 13. And I feel like Chinese education is pretty good in terms of like getting the knowledge. So when I study in Canada, everything seemed pretty easy to me, except for English. So in Canada, I think I spent a lot of time just like doing stuff I like. So, which I think is really beneficial to my own like cultivation. So I think I don't know, like I think both systems are good. They all have their own advantages. So I don't know. But if I have a kid, I think I will prefer having the kid to study in China first, and then have a really solid knowledge background, and then sent to abroad maybe.
Yeah, this seems to be the magic formula, and part of it is probably because of just the language piece, right? How important it is to be truly Chinese, to have a very strong foundation in Chinese languages, like the whole ball game, right? I'll never get it. Some of you might because you're smarter than me, but it's like, anyway, yes, in the back.
Yeah, so just following them and following the remark you just made, what is true Chinese? That is the thing. My feeling is that receiving the education, the modern Chinese education is no Chinese, no Western. It gets you to none of the essence. That's the problem. So I think we need to figure out what's the best from the Chinese and what's the best from the Western, and then we try to get that.
That's the next, right? Our next 10 years, we'll all work on that together. You're right.
I think there are people out there making that effort. And there are Chinese who are very decent on realization of the classic Chinese, the wisdom from the traditional Chinese, that's very open-minded and wants to be a global citizen, want their students to be a global citizen, and are working towards that way. I think that should be hopefully the middle way in the future. I think for parents, we should know our goal, and then we work towards that.
Yeah, it would be really controversial if I said something like, if you are rooted in traditional China, you cannot become a global citizen. So I won't say it.
I think we can make a bet today to look in 10 years, because I know there are tens of thousands Chinese little kids right now receiving receiving classic Chinese, not education, but just as a context, because I think the world linguistics knows that there is wisdom in Chinese language. It's a gradual path, from the very beginning. The current simplified Chinese language are not real Chinese languages. If you look at the real Chinese languages, the classic ones, and you look back to the different style, like the Li Shu, the Zhuan, before the Zhuan Shu, how it became the current one, and you look at those languages and you explain each character from those languages. It makes much more sense, and you see what the Chinese language really is, and it's so attractive, so beautiful. And that's what Chinese should be. And the current modern system, is not really teaching the right Chinese.
It's more utilitarian, right? Like just learn it to.
It's for
read a manual.
Right. It's I think it's losing a lot of the real essence, the merit, the virtue.
So as for closing remarks, first off, thank you very much, Mike, for spending your time. I also want to say thank you very much to the Courtyard Institute for hosting this event. Let's have another round of applause. And finally, although I am the organizer of Sino-American Talks, I don't do it alone. I have a few people that I pull in from time to time to help me with various aspects. Today, Clayton has been a very big help for me in terms of all the equipment and getting things set up. So let's give him a round of applause. And finally, the last thing before I wrap up, I have a WeChat code. I have a QR code for anybody that wants to get in the WeChat group for Sino-American Talks. I try to have small panel discussions or small lectures or presentations every couple of months. Always looking for new speakers. I have a few panels that are in need of a couple more panelists. I'm also always looking for people who are comfortable presenting individually on any type of topic relating to the relationship between Chinese and American society. So if you or if someone you know would be interested in giving some kind of a presentation or participating in some kind of a panel, please come speak with me. There's no profit in it, there's no budget in it. It's just a few people that come together because we believe that knowledge like this should be shared, should be out in the open, and then we should discuss these types of issues more.